The Locked On Podcast Network presents the Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
The Buccaneers snatch victory from the jaws of defeat.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast.
This was an ugly game after that first quarter. I had a couple people give me grief on Twitter about how I said this was going to be an ugly, nasty, low-scoring game, and then it started to look like it was going to be a shootout, and instead it was a nasty, ugly, low-scoring game. I mean, the quarterbacks were sacked a combined 7 times. Neither one turned the ball over, although Levante David dropped a sure pick that I'm sure he wishes he had back. But for this, the biggest moment was on 4th and 10 from their own 32-yard line and just a minute and 24 seconds remaining in the game. Baker Mayfield was looking for someone downfield. He had no one open. Then he takes off and runs for 15 yards and a first down. That was the ball game. That was it. You convert, you give yourself a chance. You miss it, the game's over. Baker, for as beat up as he was, we saw him grab his left leg after a sack in the first half. We saw him scramble and run and go down and grab his leg again. And then, of course, C.J. Gardner-Johnson wants to run off at the mouth, and that popped Baker right back onto his feet to jaw right back. But he put the team on his back once again and found a way to keep them alive. That was absolutely huge. After that, it was a completion to Cade Otton, a completion to Bucky Irving, another completion to Bucky Irving, a completion to Mike Evans, a completion to Cade Otton, and then the touchdown run by Rachaad White. After that first down run by Baker on 4th and 10, you just knew in your gut that Baker and the Bucs were going to find a way to win this game. And let me say this. While we're watching Josh Grizzard learn and grow as an offensive coordinator and a play caller, in the first 2 weeks of his career of an OC, the way he has been able to orchestrate and dial up the right plays in the first 2 weeks of this season to allow the Bucs to come from behind and win late in the fourth quarter is impressive. That is a sign of things to come, and he is not playing with a full deck right now. There is no Tristan Wirfs. There is no Luke Gedeke that I'll talk about in just a second. You don't have Chris Godwin. You don't have Jalen McMillan. Emeka Egbuka, you saw him on the sideline getting his leg wrapped up. I think that affected his play in the second half. He left a couple of plays out there. You are dealing with a lot of problems on this offense. But when it comes down to the most important moments, when it comes down to crunch time and the gotta have it drive, Grizzard and Baker have stepped up and done exactly what they needed to do to get the Bucs in the win column, and that has been huge. I think that's a great sign for what Josh Grizzard is going to bring the rest of the season as an offensive coordinator. I think it's a great sign about the trust and the belief that he and Baker have in one another to get done what they need to do. So I needed to give a little bit of a hat tip to Josh Grizzard. It was ugly on offense for a lot of the game, but that's not totally on Grizz. That was on the situation. But when it mattered most, they were able to get it done. But we do have to talk about these injuries. Luke Gedeke, I said in my live show, my live preview, that if Gedeke didn't play in this game, I felt like the Texans were going to win. Well, Gedeke leaves after re-aggravating that foot injury, and I started to think, I don't know if this Bucs offensive line can hold up against this Texans pass rush. Baker was sacked 4 times. He was hit multiple times. He was under duress for much of the game. So it was really, really spotty there for a while. No word on Gedeke's status. I have to think that he's probably, if he leaves with an injury on a Monday night, I have to believe that he's likely not going to be available to play on Sunday against the Jets. We're going to have to wait and see. But then the big one, Kalijah Kancey. His arm was in a sling after the game. Bowles told the media that it looks like it might be serious. I looked, when the injury happened, you saw the replay. He was going, and then all of a sudden his arm just went completely limp. He's trying to, push and force his way past an offensive lineman, and it almost looked like his arm was just completely dead. Kind of like when you dislocate your shoulder and you can't move your arm around. That's what it looked like. So if it's a torn pec, and we dealt with this with Christian Izien, I believe it was Izien that had the torn pec during training camp, a normal tear, a moderate tear, I guess is what it was called, you're looking at about a 12-week recovery. If it's severe, he's done for the year. It's over. That's a 4 to 6 month recovery. So you're hoping, best case scenario, that this is a moderate tear and that he's going to be able to return in about 3 to 4 months, which would be just in time for the, probably the last week or two of the regular season, but back for the playoff push. But this is bad. Kalijah Kancey is so good when he is available, when he's on the field, and he and Vea are such a good duo. But Kancey has not been able to stay healthy throughout his career. He has missed multiple games every single year. It's not his fault, but when you're looking at the team as a whole and you see a guy that you cannot rely on to stay on the field because he does keep getting injured, that's a problem. That is a serious, serious problem. So fingers crossed that we are going to get some good news about Kalijah Kancey and that it's not the worst case scenario and that there will be some hope that he's able to return before the season is over. But look, for a game that started off looking like it was going to be a shootout, this one was dominated by the defenses after they settled into the game. 7 combined sacks, and then the teams combined for 13 penalties and 90 penalty yards. It was ugly, just like last week was ugly. But an ugly win is better than a pretty loss. So I know all of you are excited that once again the Buccaneers have started off 2-0. Hopefully they actually start 3-0 this time. They get the Jets this week, but with as beaten and battered and bruised as they all are, that's going to be an interesting matchup. We're going to have to see these injury reports as they start to roll in. I want to jump into the chat. Lakita says Malk was limping as well. Yeah, I mean, that Houston front four is so incredible and so talented that they were really having their way with the Bucs offensive line for most of that game. But yeah, I got to agree with Fausto in here. Heck started slow, but ultimately had a big game. I would agree. The very first snap that Heck was on the field, he got absolutely torched. I believe it was Will Anderson that was lined up against him, and it was a full-blown Matador Olay. Just let him go right on by. And that, to me, that was a bad sign. So I liked the way that Heck was able to bounce back and really start to settle in and find his rhythm and his groove. Liam, pass rush looked good on third down. It had its ups and downs. I'm going to talk more about the pass rush in just a little bit. So I love that you brought that up. So it was very up and down. But I thought Bowles really started to find the right combination in the second half to stifle what Houston was able to do offensively. Richard in the chat, Kancey feels like Gerald McCoy 2.0. I don't know if I'm going to fully agree with that. I think Kancey's upside is much higher, but I also think Gerald McCoy doesn't exactly get the recognition and the respect that he probably deserves for as well as he played on some really, really just god-awful, terrible football teams. So, again, fingers crossed that we're going to get some good news about Kalijah Kancey here in the next day or two.
Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's a 401k or properties or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I linked all my accounts to Monarch and immediately spotted a few subscriptions I wasn't even using. Canceling those all can save you money every month. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNFL.
New quarterback, no problem. The Chargers absolutely dominated the Raiders and Geno Smith on Monday Night Football and now sit 2-0.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers for 10 seasons now, but this is our 8th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen, especially on the late live show edition of the Locked On Chargers podcast. But to make sure you never miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, the defense dominated. The Chargers are 2-0.
Yes, they are. Not only are they 2-0, but they're 2-0 in the division as well. Two big victories. In the first game, it was mostly about the offense. In this game, it was about the defense absolutely dominating and keeping the Raiders out of the end zone completely.
Yeah, it's exactly kind of what you hoped for this defense, especially after Geno Smith lit up the Patriots secondary last week, put up almost 400 yards, and you're like, man, maybe this is an offense they should be afraid of, but they were not. And I thought it was especially impressive the fact they lost Khalil Mack, were able to rally around that and really not skip a beat. But it was Deion Henley, it was Derwin James that were leading the way, the other captains stepping up in his absence, which was really awesome. Tarheeb Steele was also great. And the Chargers, now, even only through 2 weeks, are atop the AFC West. So we're going to have to talk about that. Also talk about the offense, the good parts of it and the bad parts of it, and also talk about Khalil Mack getting injured, something that looked pretty serious in the moment. We'll see what happens, but a big loss for this Chargers team. But I do want to tell everyone that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. David, the Chargers offense had some frustrating moments in the second half, but the defense just continued to answer the bell one time after another. And you're like, how long can they keep it up? Well, they kept it up the entire game. I mean, they absolutely dominated Geno Smith, who had a passer rating of 37 in this game. And I mean, there are individual performances that we'll talk about, but just overall, I mean, Jesse Minter is gone after this season, bro. I mean, this was a total domination by that side of the ball, just absolutely beating up the Raiders all night.
He absolutely put on a masterclass performance against the Raiders, and it was beautiful to watch. We're talking about 3 interceptions, 15 passes defense, which
That's
is
crazy.
crazy.
I didn't see that. That's nuts.
3 sacks, 5 QB hits, no touchdowns allowed, and this phenomenal stat from Next Gen Stats, Geno Smith did not complete any of his 12 pass attempts over 10 yards downfield against the Chargers, throwing 3 interceptions on those passes. That is straight up dominance, blanket coverage. They could not do anything. The Chargers married that pass rush with the coverage, and it was a sight to behold all night long.
Yeah, and I mean, this was, an improved offense for the Raiders. So, even with the banged up Brock Bowers, still, one of the top players, top receiving options in the league. Kobe Myers, a great receiver. Ashton Genty even had his moments in this one. Yeah. It just didn't matter. And this is the type of performance by the Chargers defense that lets you believe a little bit that maybe they can recreate their top scoring defense, or at least be one of them on the top of the NFL, now giving up only 15 points per game through 2 games. And I mean, it started the first play of the game. Alohi Gilman breaks on a ball, forces one up, and Deion Henley is able to come down with the interception. Then you have Tony Jefferson picking off a ball deep, and just great coverage, great heads-up play by him to get in on the action, reading the route the entire way. And then you also have Derwin James. When the Raiders were making a push late in this game, he finds a way to perfectly mirror Jacoby Myers and force another turnover in the end zone to Dante Jackson. But what about the locked on Chargers bump that Deion Henley got in this game? I mean, if I were him, I'd probably want to come back on the show every single week for the rest of the season because, man, after Mekhi Becton was questionable last second against the Chiefs, we had deja vu on Monday when all of a sudden after Denzel Perryman gets placed on injured reserve, you see that Deion Henley is now questionable for this game. And it's like, man, Denzel, they have the depth to overcome. Deion Henley is one of the best players on this defense and one of the best linebackers in the league, period. And all he did, David, was go out and have his flu game on Monday night, absolutely packing the stat sheet. He was awesome against the Raiders.
Deion Henley was everywhere, and the stat sheet absolutely describes that beautifully. 10 tackles, 2 passes defensed, 2 tackles for loss, a sack, an interception, and a QB hit. It's just Deion Henley for you right there. The guy can do it all. There's nothing he can't do on that football field from the linebacker position. You need him to go cover somebody and lock them down. He can do it. You need him to spy on the quarterback and make sure that he can't get away. He can do it. If you need him to get a big stop, to get an interception, he can do it. Deion Henley, the repeat Locked On Chargers guest. What a performance. Way under the weather, going out there and playing his absolute best football when his best was required. That's captain type of performance stuff right there.
Yeah, it's all pro type of stuff. It's definitely Pro Bowl type of stuff, to say the least. And I mean, you could see him. He looked physically different on the sideline. Not the dude who showed up for our show last week, that's for sure. So to have that, and I mean, it's just the way it happens too. Obviously, the interception's a heads-up play, being in the right place at the right time and making a play. But the 4th down sack that he got with the offense kind of reeling, the Raiders still having a chance to get back in the game, Deion waited for his opportunity. He found the gap. He shot it at an unreal speed, right, and got to Geno Smith quickly for a turnover on downs. And the big thing is also just like last year, he had an interception and a sack for the season. He didn't get it until he has 2 interceptions against the Raiders and none against anybody else. But he has now 2 sacks and an interception through 2 games. He has leveled up, which is crazy because of how well he played last year. Can't wait to see what he does when he's fully healthy next week against the Broncos. But let's also talk about the captain, Derwin James, the vocal leader of this group, who was just an animal on Monday night and deserves his flowers as well because he was great.
7 tackles, 2 passes defensed, including that spectacular tip in the end zone where he just got his head around at the perfect time, tipped it up to allow Dante Jackson to finish it off with the interception. The pressure that he was able to cause, the fact that they were using him to be able to open things up for Khalil Mack, who was able to get a sack in this game. And of course, we'll talk about that and the impact of that later on in the show. But Derwin James was everywhere. He showed you why he is quite simply one of the best defensive players in the league tonight because he can do it all, and he did it all for the Chargers defense tonight.
And I mean, you have Jim Harbaugh after the game saying he's the best safety that he's ever seen. But yeah, I mean, on that play, playing dime linebacker to just perfectly mirror Jacoby Myers and just take away the entire passing lane, getting your head around in time to break it up, getting Dante Jackson his first interception in Bolts was awesome to see. But the other one, you're totally right. I mean, totally opened up a sack for Khalil Mack. They're running a little game. He just launched the tackle, opened up a wide open lane for Khalil Mack, who doesn't miss when he gets
fun
that
to watch
close,
him,
especially
man. It's fun
against
to watch
his
him.
former team. He just doesn't miss those opportunities. But even another play, he had a blitz earlier in the game where he just blows up a running play in the backfield. Ashton Genty doesn't even get touched, but he's tripped 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage because of the chaos that Derwin was making in that backfield. But one last shout out here, Tarheeb Still. Just some awesome open field tackles. One on Brock Bowers. Blew up a screenplay to Ashton Genty for a 5-yard loss. Couple of great pass breakups as well. Tarheeb Still, we knew he could be a ball hawk. We didn't know he would have the physicality and the ability to make big plays in the open field like he showed tonight.
9 tackles, a tackle for loss, and 2 passes defense for Tarheeb Still. And the most beautiful thing for me, which I think just shows the maturation and the growth in his game, was the ability to really hone in on those open field tackles and get those guys on the ground. We saw those same exact plays go for 30 and 40 and 50 yards last year, and it's not happening this year. That's showing a guy that's dedicated to fixing his mistakes and improving his game, and he showed why we think he is going to be one of the better young corners in the NFL before too long.
Turf Toe has this cute, innocuous name, but actually it's just the worst.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast.
We can say definitively, James, that Turf Toe sucks. It is the worst.
That's right. The Turf Toe is you're right though about the name. They need to change the name. Turf Toe sounds like a minor thing, and it can be minor at times, but it's super painful. And even when you aren't one of the 2% that need surgery, it's it's not fun, and it keeps you out for a while. And unfortunately for Joe Burrow, I mean, I don't know about you, Jake. I'm not holding out hope. Like, holding out hope is the wrong thing. Of course you hold out hope, but I'm not realistically thinking that we're going to see Joe Burrow again in a Bengals uniform at any point this season, and certainly not in this calendar year. That's how I'll do it. Like, I'm not thinking about that December 14th game against the Ravens or in that range. Like, I'm not doing that. I think we've seen the last of Joe Burrow in 2025 and probably the last of him this season.
The idea that this could be as little as 3 months feels very optimistic. That is the short end. And the caveat to give there is that this injury requiring surgery is particularly rare for quarterbacks. It's rare in general. It's especially rare for quarterbacks. There was a Harvard study that looked at all turf toe injuries in a range that ended in 2017, in which 4 of the turf toe NFL injuries they looked at were quarterbacks. None of those needed surgery, which led to this idea that this is unprecedented for quarterbacks to have a turf toe that requires surgery. That's not the case. Patrick Mahomes just had it after the 2020 season, after the 2021 Super Bowl. 3 days later, he had surgery to repair turf toe that he played through and worsened, thus requiring, I think, that surgery. So definitely not something that you can play through for a long period of time. They did it with Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. It made the toe worse. He recovered fine. Patrick Mahomes, soft tissue, seems to recover great. We've seen that from him with the high ankle sprain, saw it with him with the turf toe, where he was ahead of schedule. But ahead of schedule for Patrick Mahomes meant that having that surgery a couple of days after that Super Bowl on February 3rd, he was ready to do some stuff, was the quote, for OTAs in late May. And he was good to go for training camp. But being ahead of schedule was February, March, April, end of May, nearly 4 months to do, quote, some stuff in OTAs. So what we don't know here is the difference in the severity of the damage between Patrick Mahomes, which required surgery, and Joe Burrow, which is going to immediately require surgery. But it wouldn't be crazy to assume that Joe Burrow's injury, at least initially, was worse because Joe had no illusions of playing through it, where Patrick Mahomes managed to do so for 2.5 weeks. That's speculative, but I think could be a reasonable deduction. 3 months would be awesome. We would take that. And we could talk about what that would look like and what Jake Browning would have to do to keep the Bengals afloat and all those things. But it does feel optimistic. I agree.
Yeah, it does. Now, a couple of things. One, we know Joe Burrow is as tough as they come. I've probably listened to as much about Joe Burrow and read about it as much about Joe Burrow as I humanly possible, probably. And I know Jimmy Burrow has said this multiple times, his father. Well, Joe's always been a fast healer. So that's always been a thing where he's going to push. I think his mindset is going to be to return this year. I'm hopeful that we'll hear from Joe at some point this week. As of now, and we're recording this on Monday at 4 Eastern, there's not a surgery date set. They're still evaluating that part of it. And that's a big part of it too. When does he actually have the surgery? Because once you have the surgery, then you can start to recover. And until then, well, it's going to, there's just time burning. But I think there's a reason why, and Zach alluded to this a little bit and mentioned it. Like, there's a reason why they can't just do it right now and get the show on the road. So hopefully it's soon. Hopefully he can have surgery soon. Hopefully we hear about his mindset and approach. But it's just a bummer.
Mhm.
Like it's just such a bummer, Jake, because if you would have told me, and we recorded our last show together, I did the emergency show this morning, but our last show together after the game, even if you said 2 months, well, you're like, all right, well, there's a realistic path that the 2-0 Bengals could be relevant in 2 months without Joe Burrow. But when we're talking about 3 months being optimistic, and honestly, for me, and I don't want to speak for you, but I would say 4 months is semi, like there would be a chance then. Let's say they're 11-6 and going to the playoffs, and we're going really orange and black colored tinted glasses with that. But like, could Joe play that third week of January? Well, like there might be a realistic shot at that, but that's so far away. Like they have to be so good as a team to get to that level, to get to that spot, that it's tough to see right now on September 15th when your franchise quarterback and the organization basically goes down and could potentially be out for the season.
Yeah, it is a bummer. Feels like an understatement. It's frustrating. It's infuriating. It's tragic. It's devastating. This team can win games with Jake Browning, but I don't think that, barring some renaissance from Browning, some reinvention of self, some massive development, the like 0.0001% chance that he has a Tom Brady like breakout, like that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about them being relevant in January. I think they can win games with Jake Browning, sure, but that's because they have these other stars on offense, and Jake Browning has the competency to get the ball to those guys. But like, yeah, I mean, we're talking about the engine of the team, and how many times have we said it throughout this offseason? Joe Burrow is the thing that drives this team. Without Joe Burrow, yeah, they still have talent. There's still guys that know how to win. But when you're talking about true contenders, it's a way that I've often joked about the Steelers over the years. Like, yeah, the Steelers are going to win some games, but who cares? Like, that's not where you're quite jumping to here, I would say. But like, unless Joe Burrow comes back, that is where I land ultimately.
Sure. Yeah, they're not going to suck. I think they're going to be fun. They may win this week. They may go to Minnesota and win. But when you enter the season, like a lot of our viewers and listeners, and that a lot of people in the building, and I'm at Paycor Stadium right now, it's called the Jungle Lounge, right next to the Bengals locker room. But when you're thinking Lombardi and you hear about the Santa Clara Standard and everything that we've heard over the past couple of months and off season, and when they signed Jamar and T, and Joe has the best training camp he's had, and really good in the preseason when they score 4 touchdowns in 5 possessions. Even if they do suck right now on offense overall, and they did in the majority, 3 out of the 5 quarters that Joe was under center, I would say they were under par, we'll say. You still had that belief that they'd figure it out and be one of those teams to reckon with. And now the margin for error is so much thinner with Jake Browning versus Joe Burrow.
Absolutely is. It's week 2 as well. I mean, I guess if you're going to have a long-term injury, getting it out of the way earlier in the season than later in the season is something. At least they're 2-0. All those things we were talking about yesterday, though, about like maybe there's enough cushion at 2-0 for them to absorb this. That's when you're thinking like maybe it's a 6-week injury. Maybe it's a grade 2 that needs time but doesn't need surgery. But then as soon as it's like, yeah, those ligaments are torn, there's a surgical intervention required, the tone certainly shifts.
The NFL season is finally here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits how I like to bet. Player props, same-game parlays, jumping in live as the action unfolds. It's quick, easy, and the best way to avoid your malaise on a Sunday when your team's not on. Add a little more energy to your Sunday. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet.
UCLA has proven they're ready for primetime by making the Deshaun firing happen.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins.
UCLA's bold move to Deshaun Foster makes them move at least a couple of steps forward today. And who is Tim Skipper, the interim head coach? Let's talk about UCLA. I remember discussing with my UCLA buddies. We were tailgating out there on a Friday against New Mexico, and we're sitting there like, okay, if UCLA is to fire Foster, and it was to happen after this third game, they would have to do it. I didn't believe they were going to do it. First up, I didn't believe they would do it. They'd pay the money. They gave the buyout was pretty hefty for a coach that had no experience, and still, I didn't think they'd do it. It thought that, they'd be cheap. If you watched the earlier episode of Locked on UCLA, you saw Brian Smith kind of go after the UCLA administration and athletic department about how it was a cheap hire in the first place, unfortunately, because Deshaun Foster took over a mess left by Chip Kelly and the inability to fire him. Or the lack of, they just didn't fire him. That's really the problem when it was. So then UCLA gives Deshaun Foster a really crumbling program that still needed to tank some more before really hitting rock bottom. And here we are, rock bottom. But the fact that UCLA did it after 3 games, I remember saying this, and I'm going to say this again to y'all watching and listening, they are acting like they're a real program in a sense. A real program, a real school that cared about football would get rid of their coach after 3 games. Yes, it is the shortest tenure ever. Yes, it's a really short time when generally in the head coaching profession, you need time, you need patience. But you have to think about it. Gambling on the Nico Iamaleava and that leading to a circus and just making it a lot more scrutinized for UCLA. The lack of money generated because the Rose Bowl is empty. Now, that's not all Deshaun's fault, but they got to correct their mistakes of the past, and that's the big thing. UCLA doing this after the 3rd game heading into a bye week makes a lot of sense. It gives the players some time to connect with Tim Skipper, the interim head coach, which we'll talk about in a moment, but you had to make this move at risk of even more mediocrity, at risk of more complacency, or just, fan apathy, which is probably the worst it's ever been for the UCLA football program. All right. That's just unfortunately where it is. So doing this after the 3rd game signals, hey, we made a mistake and we're going to do this and fix it immediately. All right. And that's not fair to Deshaun, but it had to happen. Now, the problem is the reason why they're in this mess in the first place is because they made this move. They hired Deshaun Foster. They didn't go after Tony White. They decided, not even PJ Fleck was good enough for this job, which, he probably wasn't. But hey, think about it. Way back when UCLA was like, hey, look at it. Think about it. We're going to go after Deshaun and give him this contract, which had a decent buyout for Deshaun's purposes, not for UCLA's purposes, even though they refused to buy out Chip Kelly in 2023. They're trying to correct the mistakes of the past, but that doesn't ease or take away the aches and pains we had to suffer through from the winter of 2024, the early part winter, heading into now where we're drifting into fall 2025. It's barely a full year and a half, if you will, a little more than that for Deshaun Foster. That's how big of a mistake that set UCLA back. Because instead of hiring the right guy and giving him now a 2nd year heading into a 3rd year to rebuild, they gave someone no experience heading into the Big Ten a massive, massive job to do with limited experience. And that's why sometimes experience resumes do matter for UCLA. And that's why we're going to hear the names of the Tony Whites of the world thrown out there. We're going to hear the potential buyout options if Kalen DeBoer is dropped by Alabama if he doesn't have a season. According to Alabama's expectations, a big name would be Kalen DeBoer. I've already gotten the text from my Oregon friends saying, hey, don't even go after Will Stein. Don't even touch him. The Oregon offensive coordinator, that has rejuvenated the career, if you think about it, of Dante Moore. And Dante Moore couldn't even do anything with Chip Kelly and UCLA his freshman year. And look what he's done out of Oregon in those first few games with Will Stein. So you've got a defensive coordinator who went after the job last time. You've got an Oregon offensive coordinator who's got experience and could be up and coming. He's been under Dan Lanning's wing these last couple of years. You've got a big name coach. Obviously, Jed Fish was a guy, if UCLA decided to make a move a long time ago, could have hired Jed Fish the first time. Maybe could have done it a second time. I'm not sure he'll be interested in the 3rd time, considering he's on the verge of potentially breaking through with Washington, heading into his 2nd full year, into what will be his eventual 3rd full season. Or do you go with the up-and-comers? Do you go with the retreads like Dan Mullen trying to get his foot back into the head coaching stuff after being an undefeated start with UNLV? Or do you go on an up-and-comer with Jason Eck, who I'll discuss with Sean Ryder in the next full episode of Locked On UCLA, who covers New Mexico? There's many ways to pivot, all right? But you need somebody with energy, with cachet to excite the fans. And now UCLA was hurt. And the reason why the Coach Foster, hire happened was because the previous regime went after Chip Kelly. They said, you know what? We're going to pay a lot of money to get rid of Jim Mora. All right. We're going to bring in a big name guy. And Chip Kelly was the big name guy. And UCLA won that battle. And he didn't want to do the job. It's unfortunate. Now, correcting a mistake shouldn't be completely applauded, but it shows that UCLA respects, I don't know if respect's the right word, but they acknowledged what was going on and decided to do something about it. Now, it helps that there's a new chancellor in place in Julio Frank that probably forces Martin Jarman to, be a little quicker about these decisions and say, hey, let's do it. Sometimes you got to spend money to make money, and sometimes you got to cut your losses. And they had to cut Deshaun Foster from the head coaching position. And I hope he's still remembered as a great Bruin, and we can just kind of just scoot past this head coaching nonsense, because it is not his fault that program is fully where it is at this moment. But the Nico nonsense, of course, he decided to go after Nico. How this team is going, some of the unfortunate media mistakes, they will be knocks on Deshaun's resume, but he was put in a horrible position. But UCLA acknowledging, saying, no. We made a massive mistake. That's part one. That's a small step forward, a good progression that they did now. Because I definitely thought that they would be like, you know what? We know it's a problem. Let's just wait for it and see what happens and maybe convince ourselves into year 3, even though that was clearly not the right move. They said, no, we're doing it now. And this is the right chance to get our players rejuvenated for the rest of the 2025 season and keep our fans engaged and interested to keep watching this team this year. Because as much as we're already looking at 2026, these players, they need some support. They need to grow and prove that UCLA is worth coming to in 26 with players that may return in some spots, and that, hey, it can be turned around with the right man at the job. All right. And the right man to lead this team as the interim skipper, if you will, is Tim Skipper, because he just did that with Fresno State.
Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's a 401k or properties or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I linked all my accounts to Monarch and immediately spotted a few subscriptions I wasn't even using. Canceling those all can save you money every month. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNFL.
Can the Longhorn offense turn things around before it's too late?
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns.
Steve Sarkisian was asked if he's surprised by how poorly Arch Manning is playing, and we'll also look back on the 3 things that I said Texas needed to do against UTEP. But first, let's dive into the Texas offense. I'll just say it right off the bat. I think Saturday's offensive performance was the worst we've ever seen from a Steve Sarkisian offense during his 4+ years in Austin. Seriously. Worse than anything that happened in 5 and 7, worse than the TCU game in 2022, worse than the Ohio State game in week 1 this year. It was the worst offensive performance that we have seen from a Steve Sarkisian-led Longhorn team. Texas averaged just 4.2 yards per play against UTEP on Saturday. 4.2. UTEP, on the other hand, who didn't get into the end zone until the very end of the game when Texas had a bunch of 3rd and 4th stringers in on defense, they averaged 4.4 yards per play. That's insane. A lot of my argument here is that Texas was playing against UTEP, right? The 4.2 yards per play number is the 5th worst for a game in the Sark era, so not the worst in that stat, but you look at the 4 performances that were worse in terms of yards per play, they all came against Power 4 teams. 2 of them happened in 2021, the losses at Arkansas and at Iowa State. You could excuse those a little bit. Year 1 for Steve Sarkisian, walking into a rough situation. A lot he had to turn around and clean up, and you were playing on the road. Arkansas won 9 games that year. Iowa State was a pretty good team that season. Okay, you could stomach those a little bit more. The TCU game in 2022, that's on the list. Well, TCU played for a national championship that year. You can deal with that one a little bit more. And then the 2024 Georgia game, the one in Austin, that was the 4th of those 4 games where Texas averaged fewer yards per play than they did on Saturday. I mean, it's Georgia. They won the SEC title last year. They're Georgia. Again, you don't like any of those performances. I'm not here telling you they're good, but you understand them a little bit more because of the opponent that you were going up against. This was against UTEP at home. Now, the good news, Texas won the game. They didn't win the others. But, man, any way you slice it, Saturday was abysmal for the Longhorn offense. Arch Manning completed 44% of his passes. He was 11 of 25 for 114 yards. He didn't get over 100 yards until we were midway through the 4th quarter. The running game barely got to 4 yards a carry, and they had way too many negative plays. I think they had 12 stuffs on Saturday, meaning 0 yards or negative yards on carries. The offensive line got pushed around against UTEP. Wide receivers weren't getting open enough. They had way too many penalties. Again, Texas sucked on 3rd and 4th down. Again, red zone failures. Again, it was all bad. It was all bad against UTEP. And give them some credit. Look, they made Texas work for everything on Saturday, and I really like Scotty Walden as a head coach. I think he's got a very, very bright future, and he's done a solid job in a year and change with that program. But come on, we're talking about UTEP here. We're not talking about Ohio State. We're not talking about any of the teams that Texas is going to see when they get to SEC play. There's no identity with this offense right now. Like, seriously, I don't know what they're good at. I'd love to hear from y'all in the comments below. What is the identity of this Texas offense through 3 games? I think the most successful play to this point in the year has been the quarterback run game. Is that the identity? Is Arch going to become Haynes King and what they do at Georgia Tech? Is Arch about to become Tyrone Swoops and what the Texas offense looked like in that era of Longhorn football? That's not what I want. And I know for a fact that that is not what Steve Sarkisian wants the identity of this group to be. They're not good at anything right now. And they sure as heck lack any sort of consistency as well. It feels like every time that group takes one step forward, it is immediately 2 steps back, right? They have that 5-minute stretch against San Jose State where they score 28 points, and it's like, oh, here it is. There's the offense. They've got their rhythm, and now it's all systems go from here on out. No. Problems the rest of that game, and obviously those problems got even worse the following week against UTEP. They are so dysfunctional as a group. It starts with the head coach, of course, who is the offensive play caller, but on the field, it starts with the quarterback. And when you have a quarterback who's not playing well, and you have a quarterback who doesn't have confidence right now, that impacts all 11 on the offense, and that is clearly what is happening right now. They look discombobulated right now. Not at times, like all the time. It's rare when they look combobulated. I think that's a word. It is rare when they look functional. Way more often than not, they've been the opposite of that. And, man, I'll tell y'all what, watching some of the other action from around the SEC over the weekend, it's hard to feel confident that the Longhorns are going to be much of a factor in this league this year. I mean, it really is. A&M looked good in a road victory at Notre Dame. Their offense scored 40-plus against a defense that played for a national title last year. Oklahoma looked good again. Obviously, an impressive showing by them against Michigan last weekend. We saw Mississippi State beat Arizona State a couple of weeks ago. Vanderbilt stomped South Carolina in Columbia on Saturday night. Georgia is still Georgia. This league is good. We know that. We've always known that. The SEC is always good, but it looks even better and deeper than usual this year. And, some of the opponents that we thought were going to be easy wins for the Longhorns feel anything but right now. This Texas defense is legit. This Longhorn defense is playing at a 12-0 level right now. This offense looks like 5-7, and I might be generous saying that, because you look at Texas's schedule moving forward, there is only one game that I am truly confident that Texas is going to win with the way that they are playing on offense right now, and that's this weekend's game against Sam Houston. Every game in the SEC, could Texas win them? Of course. But if the offense plays like it did on Saturday, they could lose all of them too. I don't think that's going to happen, but they could lose all of them too. There needs to be a sense of urgency. After the Ohio State game, the conversation was, well, we've got 3 games and 4 weeks to clean it up before SEC play gets here. Now we're down to 1 game and 2 weeks before the trip to the swamp in early October. And we've gone backwards. It's not like it's stagnated. It's actually gone worse from what we saw a week ago. That's the problem. There are 16 teams in the SEC. Texas ranks 14th in total offense. They rank 14th in scoring offense as well. The teams ranked below them, South Carolina and LSU. Both of those teams have already played 2 Power 4 opponents. Yes, Texas had to play on the road at Ohio State, but the Longhorns have also played 2 G5 teams. South Carolina and LSU have both played 2 power conference teams, and they both already played an SEC game. LSU is 3-0. I don't think they're complaining too much. South Carolina, Lenora Sellers got hurt against Vanderbilt in the first half of that game. You can kind of chalk up some of their offensive numbers and struggles to that as well. So I'd rather be LSU than Texas right now, too. The Longhorn offense is broken right now. It is broken right now. We talked about that in the post-game show on Saturday. It is broken. Now, the good news, things that are broken can be fixed. The bad news, this thing feels like it's shattered into a million pieces right now, and you're kind of running out of time to fix it. Florida's less than 3 weeks away. The Oklahoma game up in Dallas, less than a month away. Hey, coaches are problem solvers. Steve Sarkisian gets paid a lot of money to fix this stuff, and I still believe he's one of the best offensive minds in the sport. I think he's proven that in his first 4 years at Texas. Well, it's time for him to earn his paycheck. He makes a lot of money. He got a big contract extension going into this season. It's time for him to find a way to get this thing rolling because, again, there is no identity right now. There is nothing that side of the ball does well for Texas. It is sloppy. It is undisciplined. It is bad. The stats tell the story. The eye test tells the story. There is nothing you could point to that is good for the Texas offense at this moment in time. And again, the consistency. When you start to feel like maybe we found something, it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Time for Texas to fix this. Time for there to be a sense of urgency because, again, time is not your friend right now.
The NFL season is finally here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits how I like to bet. Player props, same-game parlays, jumping in live as the action unfolds. It's quick, easy, and the best way to avoid your malaise on a Sunday when your team's not on. Add a little more energy to your Sunday. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet.
Coming up, the Nets trade for Kobe Buffkin. That's right.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast.
Another Nets trade, continuing what has been a wild offseason. Brooklyn acquires Kobe Buffkin from the Atlanta Hawks today for cash considerations. And my initial reaction to the trade is this is Sean Marks addressing a really pressing need on the Nets roster for another young point guard. We all know that's really what Brooklyn needed, was another young point guard after drafting 3 in the first round this year. Just kidding. Obviously, that is not a pressing need for the Nets team. But my actual reaction to this deal is I think it's an interesting flyer for the Nets, and it follows, a pattern, a way that they should be conducting their business, entering or being into this rebuild. Same kind of strategy they took throughout their first rebuild with Sean Marks, and that's taking flyers on, players who had past pedigree, players who, were high upside guys or perceivably that in their past. And that's what they get with Kobe Buffkin. This is a guy who was the number 15 pick in the 2023 draft out of Michigan. I remember liking him going into that draft. I mean, if you watch his tape at Michigan, he showed some really high-level driving ability during his sophomore season as a guy with the ball in his hands, a lead ball handler. He, really showed that he could get downhill with a quick first step, had a variety of, pretty crafty off-the-dribble moves. He shot 70% at the rim, or over 70% at the rim, and he improved as a three-point shooter, during that campaign. He shot in the mid-30s. He flashed some, defensive capabilities. He does have really good size at point guard at 6'5", with a 6'8" wingspan. And because of that, I remember I looked back after this trade broke at some of the things I had written leading up to that draft. And there were a lot of people who had Bufkin, mocked in the late lottery as high as number like 9 or 10. He was really in that 10 to 15 range. Then he ended up falling to 15 during the draft. But if you're trying to get an evaluation of him as a player and what he could be for this Nets team, it's pretty difficult because he just hasn't played much basketball since joining the league. He had a thumb injury during his rookie season and obviously just wasn't really ready to play NBA minutes. He only played in 17 NBA games that year and then had 14 G League appearances. And then this past season, he played in 10 games at the beginning of the year before having season-ending shoulder surgery in December. So he was an intriguing prospect coming out of the draft, and there were a lot of people who liked him and thought that he would be a rotation piece for the Hawks, and it just didn't work out that way. Some, because of injuries, and then obviously he just didn't develop the way that the Hawks hoped he would in terms of when he did play, the scoring efficiency really wasn't there. He is a guy who, while he has good size from a height perspective, needs to add some weight to his frame, and he did struggle, finishing at the rim in his limited opportunities. He struggled as a three-point shooter, and obviously Atlanta wasn't too high on his capabilities because they just traded him for literally nothing but financial flexibility. Bufkin has a $6.9 million team option in 2026-27 that the Hawks were going to decline. And by doing this and trading him for cash considerations, they're creating a lot more room below the luxury tax. And that's important because they're going to have to extend guys like Dyson Daniels and Kristaps Porzingis. And if you look at their guard rotation this season, they obviously already have Trae Young. They have Dyson Daniels. They got Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Luke Kennard this offseason. So they're really didn't seem like there was going to be a place for Bufkin. And obviously Atlanta decided that he wasn't going to be a player that was going to make an impact or that they felt had a ceiling, long-term for them where he was going to be a rotation caliber piece. And, the Nets take advantage somewhat of their position, as a team, the only team left in the NBA with cap space because Bufkin's making a little bit over $4 million this season. And you'd think, there are still teams who could acquire him. They could trade other players for him. They could bring him into exceptions. And you would think if there were other teams who were high on him as a player, that somebody would have maybe been able to give up a second-round pick or something along those lines for him. So it doesn't really seem like he had a market whatsoever. And the Nets are able to get him for free. So I think from that perspective, it's a good trade for the Nets. You're not giving up anything. You're taking a player who has some past pedigree. I like, in college what Bufkin showed offensively, and he just hasn't been able to carry it over to the NBA since then. But getting him for free, we'll see what he can do. And he should be a player who should get some opportunities for the Nets this season, similar to what you saw the Nets do like with a guy like Zaire Williams last year, a guy who was a former lottery pick. He was cast off, didn't catch on during his time with Memphis, although he played more than Bufkin did and was there longer. But the Nets get him as a salary dump. They get a second-round pick alongside him. And he had a good year last year, and then he gets a contract extension with the Nets, and they'll have an extended runway to see what he can be. We'll see if, Bufkin can show similar flashes, if he can be a guy who warrants another opportunity. But even if not, the Nets are no worse off for wear, and we'll see what he can do, in a guard rotation that is just absolutely stacked right now. Reacting to Brooklyn's acquisition of Kobe Bufkin from the Atlanta Hawks. That's another young point guard coming to this Nets roster. Bufkin, a little, almost 22 years old, so still in that younger range, part of that 2023 draft class. And this move, obviously, I made a joke at the beginning of this podcast because this trade is off the heels of the Nets just making headlines and some people almost making fun of them for taking 3 international point guards in the first round of this year's draft in Yegor Dioman, Nolan Traore, and Ben Saraf. Now they add Bufkin to the mix. They also obviously have Cam Thomas, at least for now, after he signed his 1-year, $6 million qualifying offer. So it's a very crowded guard rotation. It's a crowded Nets roster overall, which I'm going to get to in a little bit. But just focusing on the guard rotation, I do think that this will impact, the way that the Nets point guard rotation, especially for these rookies, plays out throughout the year somewhat, because I do think that they're going to want to get a look at Bufkin. I mean, this is a guy who, as I said, has a $6.9 million team option next season. Whether the Nets pick that up, whether they decline him, they obviously saw something in him where they thought that it made sense to bring him in, even though they gave up nothing for him but cash considerations. If they didn't think that he had any potential, they wouldn't have traded for him. So they bring him into the mix. You have a little bit, obviously, of a clock on your decision for him, and you need to make that decision sooner than some of these rookie point guards. Those guys are developmental guys. You're going to have them down the line. And while Bufkin is that too, he has that team option next season. So this is similar to the Zaire Williams situation, I think, where they bring him in. And, I think Bufkin maybe doesn't have that expansive of a role next season, but I think he will have a role, and he's a guy that they're going to want to get minutes. So, it's going to affect these other guys. And I've said, Yegor Dioman, I think, is going to be the Nets starting point guard. I don't think there's really any question about that. I think Nolan Traore will have a rotation role from day one as a guy who comes in off the bench as the Nets point guard in the second unit, and also can play in the first unit when Dioman, slides down to the 2 or down to the wing. I've said that I think that Ben Saroff is the guy of those 3 point guards, and then also Danny Wolf, not a point guard, but another guy at the end of that Nets draft class that I think will spend some time in the G League to begin the year. So that's kind of how I see this playing out. I think the Nets have used Long Island as a tool to develop players in the past. You look at guys like, obviously, Noah Clowney spent some time down there, Nick Claxton, any of the Nets draft picks for the most part have spent some time in Long Island. Tariq Whitehead's been there. So I would expect that guys like Saroff and Wolf, Saroff particularly because we're talking about the point guard rotation down there. At the beginning of the year, I think we'll spend some time in Long Island. I think that he'll get minutes in the NBA as well. But adding Bufkin to the mix now, this is just another guy that you're going to want to at least see what he has, and you're going to want to, feature him at least to understand whether or not you're going to want to pick up that team option or whether he has potential to earn another deal down the line. So it's just a really crowded, Nets backcourt rotation at this point. And, it's also just a really crowded Nets roster, in general. You look at this now, the Nets made another move today, signing David Muoka. Most of you probably don't know who that is, but he played for the Nets G League team in 2023-24, young center. But point is they signed him, and if you include the unofficial signings of Fambo Zhang and Ricky Council, and now this Kobe Bufkin trade, the Nets have 24 players under contract, and that's well over what you're allowed to carry. You're only allowed to have 21 players under contract during the offseason and at training camp. The reason that they have it right now is because the Bufkin trade has not been made official yet. The Fambo Zhang signing and the Ricky Council signing, none of those have been made official yet. But the Nets are going to have to get off 3 more players ahead of the start of the regular season, and they obviously have several guys on partially or non-guaranteed contracts. When you look at Keon Johnson, you look at Jalen Wilson, Tyrese Martin, Drew Timme as well. So there's going to be more roster moves